Part 1.
You will hear part of a tutorial between two students and their tutor. The students are doing a research project to do with computer use. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 5. Now listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 5.
Dr. Barrett?
Sammy, come in. Is Irene with you?
Yes.
Good. Sit down. Right, we're looking at how far you've got with your research project since we last met. You decided to do a survey about computer facilities at the university, didn't you?
That's right. We decided to investigate the university's open access centres and, in particular, the computer facilities. Lots of the students are having trouble getting access to a computer when they need one, so we thought it would be a useful area to research.
Good, fine. It's not a topic anyone has looked at before, as far as I know, so it's a good choice. So what background reading did you do?
Well, we looked in the catalogues in the library, but we couldn't find much that was useful. It's such a specialised subject, hardly anything seems to have been published about it.
And as well as that, the technology is all changing so quickly.
But the Open Access Centre has an online questionnaire on computer use that it asks all the students to do at the end of their first year. And the supervisor gave us access to that data, so we used it as a starting point for our research. It wasn't exactly what we needed, but it gave us an idea of what we wanted to find out in our survey. Then we designed our own questionnaire.
And how did you use it?
We approached students individually and went through our questionnaire with them on a one-to-one basis.
So you actually asked them the questions?
That's right. We made notes of the answers as we went along, and actually we found we got a bit of extra information that way as well, about the underlying attitudes of the people we were interviewing, by observing the body language and things like that.
How big was your sample?
Well, altogether we interviewed a random sample of 65 students, 55% male and 45% female.
And what about the locations and times of the survey?
We went to the 5 open access computer centres at the university and we got about equal amounts of data at each one. It took us 3 weeks. We did it during the week, in the day and in the evenings.
Not the weekends?
No.
So presumably your respondents were mostly full-time students?
Yes. Oh, you mean we should have collected some data at the weekends from the part-time students? We didn't think of that.
OK, it's just an example of how difficult it is to get a truly random sample. So, how far have you got with the analysis of results?
Well, everyone agreed there was a problem, but we're more interested in what they think should be done about it. The most popular suggestion was for some sort of booking system. About 77% of the students thought that would be best, but there were other suggestions. For example, about 65% of people thought it would help if the opening hours were longer, like 24 hours a day.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 6 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 6 to 10.
So, what other suggestions did people come up with?
Well, actually, the main reason why people can't get to a computer is because so many students are using them for personal emails or just surfing the web. So one solution would be to have some computer rooms for recreational use and some for people to do serious work in. The trouble is, quite often people do their work, then they want to check their emails. And it would be a nuisance if you had to get up and go to another room and log on again just for that.
Another problem is that during the day, tutors book whole blocks of computers for complete sessions, so several people said there should be restrictions on block bookings. But the trouble is, the classes need the computers. There's nothing else they can use. Some people said the whole problem would be solved if the university would just buy more computers, but other people said it might make things better for a bit, but it wouldn't really solve the problem permanently. You can't just solve the problem by throwing money at it.
And with the suggestion that the computer room should stay open round the clock, some people did point out that there'd have to be someone around all the time to make sure the equipment didn't get stolen, especially at night.
So a booking system seems to be the best suggestion.
Yes. Apparently some universities have a sort of queuing system. It means the staff at the open access centres have to organise it, but people say it works quite well. You go along, and if there isn't a computer free just then, you're given a numbered ticket, and then when your number is called out, you have the next available computer. Or it can be done electronically as well, but that's more complicated, and it isn't really necessary.
Good. So, now let's discuss...
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2.
Part 2.
You will hear a tour guide giving information about a shopping district. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 15. As you listen to the first part of the talk, answer questions 11 to 15.
This afternoon, we'll visit the city's shopping district. Several blocks in the area are closed to car traffic, and I know you'll enjoy walking around there. I'd like to give you an overview of the district now, since you'll be on your own once we get there. You'll see on this map here that the shopping district consists of 2 streets, Pear Street, which runs north and south, and Cherry Street, which crosses Pear Street right here. Let's start our tour here on Pear Street, where the star is. This star marks the Harbor View bookstore. It's very popular among locals as well as tourists. You can buy a range of books of local interest, as well as a variety of magazines and newspapers. It's directly across the street from the city library, which is also worth a visit. It's in one of the oldest buildings in the city and contains, among other things, an interesting collection of rare books. Now, moving up Pear from the bookstore toward Cherry, the next building on the left is the Pear Cafe. You'll notice it's right on the corner of Pear and Cherry Streets. It's a great place to relax while enjoying a delicious cup of coffee or tea. You can talk with friends or read quietly. They have a variety of books and magazines available. From the windows of the cafe, you can look right across Cherry Street for a lovely view of city gardens. It's a rather small garden, but it contains a variety of exotic plants and flowers. Let's leave the cafe and cross Pear Street. On the opposite corner, we're at Caldwell's clothing store, which you might also want to visit. They sell both men's and women's fashions from countries around the world. Continuing down Cherry Street, the next building on the right after Caldwell's is the souvenir shop. Stop in here to get maps and books about the local area, as well as T-shirts and postcards with pictures of the city. Now, we cross Cherry Street and we're at the Art Gallery, one building down from the corner. Here you can see and, of course, purchase many fine paintings and sculptures by local artists. Let's keep going down Cherry Street toward the harbor. On the left, right after the gallery, is Harbor Park. It's a lovely place, and it's certainly worth spending some time there.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 16 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 16 to 20.
Harbor Park was built on land donated to the city by Captain Jones, a lifelong resident of this city. Captain Jones designed the park himself, and it was built in 1876. Exactly in the center of the park, a statue of Captain Jones was erected, and it's still standing there today. It shows Captain Jones on the bow of his ship. After viewing the statue, you can follow the path that goes through the woods just behind. It will lead you to a lovely garden, in the middle of which is a fountain. This is a nice place to enjoy a few quiet moments. If you still feel like walking, continue on to the far end of the garden. There, you'll find a wooden staircase, which will take you down to the harbor. You might enjoy the view of the boats from there. There's also a walking path along the water, which will eventually bring you back up to Cherry Street. You can see that there's plenty to do in this part of the city. The bus leaves at 1:30.
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3. Part 3.
You will hear a tutor and 2 students discussing the best ways to study.
First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 25.
Well, how are you both settling in?
Fine.
Yes, no problems. So far, anyway.
Good. Remember that as your personal tutor, I'm here to help you if you do have any difficulties. Now, as you know, lectures start on Monday, so I thought we'd look at a few ways of making the most of them, especially in terms of the notes you take. Let's begin by thinking about what you can do before you even go to the lecture. Any ideas?
Make sure you're up to date with all the background reading, so you know plenty about the subject already.
Yes, that's essential. The lecturer will assume you have that knowledge. Anything else, Carlos?
Well, check what the topic's going to be. Of the lecture, that is.
I'd go a bit further than that and consider what the content may be. Then you could ask yourself some questions that you want answering and listen out for the relevant information during the lecture.
Okay.
Now that brings us to the lecture itself and the actual business of writing notes. But there's a lot to deal with there, so we'll come back to that later. What I'd like to do for the moment is continue with the process of note-taking and move on to the next stage. Any suggestions for what that might be?
When the lecture is over, you mean?
Yes, once you're able to sit down somewhere quiet with your notes.
Read them?
More than that, you need to make sure they'll still make sense to you weeks, months later.
Edit them?
Yes, that's what's needed. It's well worth spending a few minutes on it. Any missing words, anything difficult to read, things you didn't have time to jot down, now is the time to do so, while everything's still fresh in your mind.
Right. And after that, when's the best time to revise them?
When do you think, Carlos?
I'd say just before the next lecture, in the same subject.
Precisely. That's a vital time to look at them again, for obvious reasons. But it's definitely not the only time. When should you revise them again?
A month later, maybe?
Sooner, and much more often than that. I'd recommend you look at them again once a week. That's why it's so important they're complete and easy to follow.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 26 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 26 to 30.
Right. Let's go back to note-taking and begin with the basics before the lecture has even started. What should you do when you walk into the room?
Get a good seat, at the front if you can, where you can hear clearly and avoid distractions.
Yes, though obviously others will have had the same idea, so it's as well to get there a bit early. So, when the lecture's underway and you're busy jotting things down, what should you try to ensure?
That you're getting all the main points.
And what if you don't catch something you know must be important?
I'd leave a space. Then I could check it later. Perhaps by asking a question at the end and fill it in afterwards.
That's an excellent way to deal with it, yes. And there's something else I'd like to mention here. Talking about going through notes afterwards, it's absolutely vital that what you write is legible for one very good reason. It saves time. You'll waste many hours during the course if your revision is held up because you can't read what you've written. Okay. What else can we do to make listening and note-taking more efficient?
Well, I always listen out for signpost words.
Sorry, what are they?
They're the ones lecturers use to say where they're going. A bit like a signpost at a road junction, I suppose. Things like, the first reason is, however, to sum up, and so on.
Yes, they can tell you when something important is coming. and help you organize your notes, too. Is there anything else you can add, Carlos?
There's something I think's very useful, but it's later, after the lecture is finished.
That's fine. Go on.
Well, what I do is go through what I've written down, summing up the main points in a few words in the margin, on the left-hand side of the page. I try to use words that'll jog my memory, so that I can remember what everything's about when I look at them again.
Yes, that can work very well. What some people do to review their notes is cover up their full notes from the lecture, maybe with a piece of paper or a card, and concentrate just on what they've put in the margin, trying to recall the details. Then they move the cover down a little and check whether they were right.
Or you could put your main points on another piece of paper and clip them together. Instead of covering and uncovering, you just hold a page in each hand.
Sure. It's down to personal preference, really. Everyone has their own learning style.
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 4.
Part 4.
You will hear part of a lecture about a website.
First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Good afternoon. I'm Jenny Ironbridge, and today I'm going to be continuing my series of talks on information technology by looking at an innovative information source available on the internet. I'm sure you're all familiar with the strengths and weaknesses of the popular search engines like Google or Yahoo. Sometimes you can find what you're looking for instantly. At other times, searching for something which may or may not exist can be a frustrating and time-consuming experience. So, where can you go to get the information you want? The information source I want to talk about is called Wikipedia. As its name suggests, it's a form of encyclopedia. It's already the largest information source in history, both in terms of its breadth and its depth. But what makes Wikipedia really unique is that it's a democratic project. The content is completely free to access, and it's written entirely by unpaid volunteers. Changes and additions are being made all the time to articles which exist already, but it's also possible to contribute whole new articles. And basically, anyone can contribute once they've grasped the basics of editing the pages. Let's look at how someone goes about editing Wikipedia articles. It's a very straightforward procedure which has been made deliberately easy so that people who have contributions to make are not discouraged from participating because of their limited understanding of information technology. Let's start by imagining that we are reading an article and we come across information that we consider to be incorrect or incomplete on a page of Wikipedia. First of all, we decide we'd like to change it. To do this, we click on the Edit button at the top of the page. This takes us to another page with a text box containing all the editable text on that page. It's at this point that we can input our changes in exactly the same way as we would if we were writing or editing a document we had created on our own computer. In other words, we can type cut and paste, delete, and use all the normal word processing functions. When this has been done, and we've finished editing, we are then asked to summarise the changes we've made. This doesn't go into the main text box, but into a separate area below it. That's the main part of the process over with, but we need to make sure that the changes we've made are going to appear as we want them. A last check, if you like. In order to do this, we select the Preview option. If we're still not satisfied, we have the option of returning to the Edit stage and working through the same procedure again. Finally, if we're satisfied with the result, we simply click on Save, and our changes will take immediate effect. A question that might already be forming in your mind, if you are not familiar with Wikipedia, is this: how can I tell whether information is accurate? This particular point has led to criticism from some people, especially academics and professionals. The short answer is that you can't tell. But if you think about it, how can you check the accuracy of information you read in a conventional encyclopedia, or in a newspaper, or on other internet websites? Besides, it's possible for contributors to Wikipedia to register with the organisation and, as named contributors, gradually build up a reputation for themselves as reliable sources of information. The other point to be aware of is that there are administrators who monitor contributions that are added by anonymous sources and check for biased, out-of-date or incorrect information. One of the problems that arises from the openness of Wikipedia is that vandals have got into the site to change and damage pages of information. So the administrators have a role in policing this too. Lastly, Wikipedia encourages editors to stick to certain rules, which help ensure the quality of entries. For example, contributors are expected to maintain a neutral tone in their writing, although perhaps it's impossible to be completely neutral. Also, entries are not allowed to include original research, which is intended to prevent contributors from simply submitting their own views. It's unlikely that the more conventional information sources will ever be completely replaced by Wikipedia or similar projects which may be developed in the future. But this is an ambitious experiment to democratise information, using modern technology to enable anyone and everyone to contribute to and access a common body of knowledge. And because it's free, it doesn't restrict access to those with the ability to pay.
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.